UFC fighter pay has reached new heights of controversy. The old legends are furious, current stars are lashing out, and lower tier fighters are saying they're literally broke.
It's one of the worst places to go.
Fans, fighters, and the media are all pointing out how the system is designed to keep almost all UFC athletes poor.
You hear a lot of other people saying, well, you signed a contract, well, you negotiated this. It was like, yo, there is no negotiating.
And all of this is happening while Dana White is giving Conor Benn $15 million for a single boxing match. Paramount just gave $7.7 billion for the UFC TV rights, and the UFC is richer than ever. But fighters? It's the same old story. Fight for half your purse, barely break even, and pray Dana thinks you fought well enough to get blessed with a bonus. They're at the mercy of the UFC, and right now, the UFC doesn't look interested in paying them what they're worth. So this is how the UFC system keeps its fighters broke. We all know UFC fighter pay is a major issue, more so now than ever.
UFC was the best place that you could come in combat sports to make a living and be paid fairly, and now it's no longer. It's one of the worst places to go. It's why so many of their top athletes are leaving to go and find pay elsewhere. It's why their champions like Valentina are selling pictures of their titties on OnlyFans.
The underlying problem is the revenue split. In other sports, around 50% of the total revenue goes to the athletes, but in the UFC, that number isn't even 20%.
And fighters are getting taken advantage of. You know, this is the most dangerous sport in the world, and the UFC, makes billions of dollars a year, and they're only paying their fighters 15% of that. Ari Emanuel, the CEO of Endeavor, his salary last year was more than the entire UFC roster. So these fighters are risking their lives for $10,000.
And then, when you dive into the actual numbers, they're pretty shocking. UFC debutantes almost always arrive on a $12,000 to fight, $12,000 to win contract. Bear in mind, these are fighters who have gone through the amateurs and regional organizations to make it here. They're absolutely elite MMA fighters, yet get treated like nobodies.
And at some point, probably not in our lifetime, the fighters will come to realize that they are being treated like pro athletes in the major leagues, and yet they get zero benefits like the pro athletes in the major leagues. It's wild to me. They are now among the greatest sports franchises and leagues in America as far as rights deals are concerned, and they get zero the rights. They get zero revenue sharing. They get zero collective bargaining, no seat at the table, and now it's hitting them.
For reference, a rookie NFL player in their first year is guaranteed almost $900,000 as a yearly salary. And let's get even crazier. The WNBA generated around $250 million in 2025, yet the minimum yearly salary is $300K. For contrast, the UFC generated $1.5 billion in 2025, and a new fighter would be extremely lucky to get $100K in a year. But when you dig even further into the realities, that's when the contrast becomes even more wild. Rookie players in traditional sports are guaranteed that money no matter what. They can be injured, never see a minute of game time, and still earn almost $1 million. Their healthcare is looked after, their travel paid alongside for a bunch of other perks. UFC fighters, though, they're independent contractors, not employees. And that's where a lot of problems stem from.
Unless you create some kind of legally enforcing mechanism to make Zuffa, UFC, or TKO pay you what you are owed, you are not going to be paid what you are owed. This is not very difficult to understand, fellas.
That means no healthcare, no travel costs, sorting out their own taxes. And if you're injured, you're not getting paid. End of story. It's why you see so many fighters competing with injuries or staph infections, because they literally need to fight in order to not go bankrupt. They still have to pay gym fees, management fees, and finance their daily lives. And with the new Paramount deal, the UFC is legitimately a top sports organization in America. The days of being a small underground sport are long gone. For many fighters, they have regular jobs outside of MMA. Just like Alexandre Pantoja after being on The Ultimate Fighter and having half a dozen UFC fights.
A few years before he was the flyweight champion, he was driving Uber or Uber Eats, like just trying to making, scrapping to get bills paid. And
it's one of the reasons why the bonus system seems so outdated. Almost every week, it feels like fighters are begging for a bonus. They can even be main event guys with numerous UFC fights under their belt, yet they earn the 50K and start crying their eyes out. Sure, it's wholesome. Sure, it's great to see. But you've just main evented a sold-out arena with 25,000 people being watched by millions online and are brought to tears through earning money that athletes in other sports earn in a week. A top 15, even a top 50 guy in the entire world of a major sport shouldn't have to react like that. The issue is, this model has been the same since almost the very beginning of the UFC. Since then, the sport has gone global. TV deals are raking in billions, the production is infinitely better, the standard of fighters is far stronger, inflation has gone wild, yet pay has hardly moved in line with any of those. Back in the day, getting a bonus for a knockout of the night when MMA was a much smaller sport was amazing. But now it's backwards. If a UFC debutant loses their fight, they get 12K. By the time you factor gym fees, travel, paying for coaches, management, training expenses, nutrition, they're probably lucky to break even. And it's through this system that the UFC is able to keep the majority of the roster essentially broke. Simply put, the fighters have zero bargaining power. The only way would be through a union.
If all the fighters decided not to go to work until we have a signed agreement where it's 30-70, which would be insane improvement, which they could afford. 40-60, 50-50, whatever it is.
They have to fight often and have to go for exciting bonuses to really catapult their finances. But the scariest thing is, the UFC have actually made it harder for fighters to earn money over the years, stripping them of their independence to the point where the UFC controls everything. For newer fans, they may not remember the time when fighters could wear whatever they wanted inside the octagon. Nowadays, all fighters have to wear Venom gear, and at the very most you can get custom shorts if you're lucky. Before standardized clothing though, fighters would use their shorts essentially as advertising. It may seem silly, but if you had a bit of a name, you could make serious money through this, even if you weren't a top guy. When Brendan Schaub was competing at heavyweight, his sponsorship money was his main source of income.
20 grand and 15 grand in sponsorship ain't shit.
In 2020, you were making more back then.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I was making more than that. If you go through it, 7, 14, 7, that's 21. I was making more than the entire card combined.
Jeez.
In one fight.
But in order to appear more of an established, structured sport, they signed a $70 million deal with Reebok. As a result, killing fighters using their own popularity as a means of income. And what was even crazier, they were actually making money themselves from the fighters' fame. Sean O'Malley went on record to say Reebok sold a wild amount of his merch, only to give him a pathetic check at the end of it.
If I read it right, which I think I did, and then I even sent it to my dad, I'm like, did I read this right? And he said yes. So unless we're both can't read, they made over $1 million, Reebok made over $1 million on all my merch, and I got like $3,000. I'm like, what the
No, you both can read.
It's ridiculous. Well, I'm like, I thought I got 15%. Like, well, you get 15% of this,
Gross and
but of this, and then these guys get it, and then you get 50% of that. I'm like, holy
That's dirty.
shit, so you gotta f me. And then they make all these sweet shirts on Reebok. I'm like, damn. I tell people, I'm like, don't buy that.
That theme is consistent with all UFC fighters as far as we can see. The royalties imposed by the UFC are horrible. They were reporting earning as little as a couple $100 to be used in the official UFC video game. But while the second way the UFC fighters making more money is a little less direct, it's the most damaging of all. Throughout the years, fighters had options, some better than others. Strikeforce, Pride, Elite XC, Bellator. All avenues to perhaps make more money, or at least a fallback option. But now though, the UFC practically bought or killed every other MMA organization. There just is almost no competition.
They pay you whatever they want to pay you. They let you pretend that you're negotiating while you're not negotiating, because either way, you're still in the contract.
The landscape might be beginning to change, but for many years, fighters had zero options. Accept the UFC's terms, or they'll find someone else who will. Historically, the only way to huge financial gain has been through being a popular champion, or someone with an absurd amount of UFC fights. But considering there's over 800 fighters signed to the company, maybe 10% at most fall into that bracket. For the remaining 90, it's fight to fight, paycheck to paycheck, and praying that a bonus can change your financial situation, despite the fact you compete in a multi-billion-dollar organization. But in the case of Demetrius Johnson, being a pound-for-pound great, one of the longest-reigning champions in the sport's history, and perhaps the most technical fighters of all time, wasn't enough. Even he had complaints about not being treated fairly.
If I would have had, pay-per-view points on 11 consecutive title defense, you do the math. I would be way well off. So, so
did you get it?
No, I got it on one fight, and that's when I fought Henry Cejudo the second time.
But these are all examples from the past. Recently, the UFC announced perhaps its greatest deal ever, and a sign that after 30 years of fighter pay scrutiny, the tide might be changing. In January, Paramount took over as the home of the UFC, paying $7.7 billion for the privilege. Immediately, things were looking up. The UFC bonuses finally changed, increasing from $50K to $100K for 4 fighters per card. And also, any fighter who didn't get awarded a bonus but finished their fight receives an extra $25,000. This, plus an influx of almost $8 billion, had the UFC world thinking the issue of fighter pay would be no more. Surely a lot of that money would trickle down to the athletes, but that doesn't seem to be the case.
You'll have people like Ali Abdelaziz's manager who will come out, this is going to be great for everyone. But here's Justin Gaethje saying, how is it going to be great for me? Maybe on Saturday he'll find out that the bonuses are $100K. No one has asked that question yet. Maybe they ask it at today's press conference. But bottom line is, I give him credit for bringing this up because this is the harsh reality. Here's a guy who's one of the greatest fighters in UFC history, who's reaching the end of his career, the end of the road, and he's looking around and he's saying, I don't have much to show for.
Instead, a theory amongst UFC fans is growing that the promotion doesn't care about putting on the big shows like they used to. A major part of the Paramount deal was the removal of traditional pay-per-views. The idea is that without them, the UFC isn't incentivized as much to create stacked cards for their numbered events.
With this whole Paramount thing, I was kind of, we'll see how it turns out. I was kind of worried, if you take pay-per-view off the table, how much is UFC going to put the biggest fights together? Because they don't need to sell pay-per-views. They're guaranteed money. Right. I was just wondering if that would not water it down, but it would get a bunch of weaker cards, and I'm still waiting to find out.
And without money via pay-per-view, fighters can't use their star power to generate income like they used to.
That's why Ronda decided to go to MVP and fight Gina, because they originally went to Dana, and she was like, hey, now that there's no pay-per-view, I want this guaranteed amount. And he was like, no, that's just not our business model. It's not what we do, because if we pay you all that money, then we're going to have to do that down the road.
Yeah.
Good luck somewhere else. She was all, say less.
Yeah.
I went to MVP, and they're like, here's a guaranteed money.
They now have a quota of shows to fill out and get their Paramount money no matter what. The theory also believes that this is the reason the UFC has fumbled a massive amount of big fights in recent times. Say what you want about the UFC, but not getting big fights over the line has never been an issue for them. When push comes to shove, those gigantic best versus best matchups almost always get made. But recently, it's been a mess. Not being able to get Conor McGregor to return, losing Ronda Rousey to the Netflix show, and the mess that was John Jones versus Tom Aspinall.
Okay, well, we're going to offer you this opponent. Yes, no problem, I accept. Day after day after day. No problem, we'll send the contract. Excellent, it's a great matchup, that's a great matchup, that's a great matchup. It's all you'll ever hear about out of me. And no contract came. And that's kind of where I'm at. Still here in this limbo.
And all of these legends of the sport, people integral to the UFC's success, have spoken out about how tough it's been to deal with the company they once called home.
You hear a lot of other people saying, well, you signed a contract, well, you negotiated this. It was like, yo, there is no negotiating. Why do these guys keep thinking that? It's you want to be here or not. And that's why I'm okay, because it's like, I'm okay with being here because there is no other place for us to go.
These fighters are usually unwaveringly loyal to the UFC, but the cracks are beginning to show. And according to Dana White himself, the UFC was willing to pay him a massive $30 million for him to fight against a young, hungry potential star in Tom Aspinall. But for a proposed matchup against Alex Pereira, someone at the tail end of his career, that offer was half. Essentially, the UFC was happy to pay more to tempt John into a fight with Aspinall and potentially build the Brit star power off his name. But for an older Pereira, no chance.
And now we find out about John Jones and the fact that the UFC basically didn't want to pay him anywhere near the amount that could even be considered for this card. We're hearing numbers closer to Conor Benn, which is about $15 million, and John Jones obviously and his team not even entertaining that.
Funnily enough, it was a potential opponent of John Jones and Francis Ngannou who summed the situation up best.
John Jones needs to get paid, maybe not only for the fight that he's fighting, but for what he have done for the sport, for where he have taken the sport to. Isn't the John Jones that they are out there bragging that he's a GOAT? Man, if the GOAT is not respected, then who should be respected? I worry if the GOAT is being treated like that. I truly worry if that's how they treat the GOAT. Then those who are not the GOAT, I don't know, whatever they are, well, imagine what they are going through.
If they refuse to budge in negotiations with John Jones of all people, the fighter Dana loves proclaiming as the best ever, just imagine what happens to regular fighters. And perhaps ironically, the same difference in money, $15 million, was the same amount given to a boxer that caused one of the greatest uproars about fighter pay in recent memory. A big criticism of the UFC has been that Dana White has lost a bit of interest. He's more focused on power slap, other endeavors, and most notable Zuffa boxing.
You want to see how disinterested Dana White is in all of this and how little he actually cares about the current state of the company? Take a listen to this clip right here regarding the rankings.
In the latest rankings update, Colby Covington was moved down just one slot in the welterweight rankings. The guy's fought once in the last 752 days and lost. His last win was March of 2022. How does a guy like that stay in the top 15 for years after not fighting?
It's a great point.
Do you have those conversations about the rankings where it's why is this guy, like Jeff Neal was moved one spot above him? Strange, no?
Yes.
Yeah.
You're right. Great point.
Dana's always been a boxing guy, even before mixed martial arts. And with the help of Turki al-Sheikh's endless pockets of cash, he started to make serious headway in the sport. But the most controversial moment was when he signed arguably his biggest name boxer to the Zuffa roster, Conor Benn, and offered him $15 million for a single fight. While absolutely elite and entering his prime, Conor Benn is no Canelo Alvarez or no Anthony Joshua in terms of star power. In the UFC, he'd be a top 10 guy likely making less than $100K per fight. But here, Dana White was publicly giving Conor Benn what would probably be a payday only one or two fighters would have ever seen in UFC history. And it caused a lot of friction amongst MMA fans, media, and definitely the fighters.
You've been in the UFC for well over a decade, former champion, all that stuff. Just curious, when you saw Conor Benn get $15 million from Zuffa Boxing, what did you think?
The first thoughts were, I was like, are you kidding me? I don't even know who this guy is.
But it's just hurtful to see the money go that way for somebody that, for me, is not at the top of his field. He's a great boxer. I'm a fan of his. I love watching his fights because it's always exciting. He always gives it all. But in that division, he's nowhere near the best.
It even caused Conor Benn's former boxing promoter Eddie Hearn to step somewhat into the MMA world. He recently signed Tom Aspinall to a deal, helping to promote his brand and essentially just to make him more money.
When I talked through Tom Aspinall's purses, I nearly fell off the f***ing chair. Do you know what I mean? Because I know that if that was our business, it'd be making 10 times as much money. His return is going to be massive when it comes. And as an organisation, they need him. Forget he needs the UFC. He actually don't need the UFC now. But they need him, because they need heavyweight stars on stars full stop.
At UFC London, MVP actually walked out to a Michael Jackson song titled "They Don't Care About Us," clearly a message to the company. Also in the lead up to the event, Nathaniel Wood, who's 11-3 in the UFC, said he was heartbroken at seeing what he'd be earning to compete. And even during the event, Danny Silva, who finished a guy with a lot of hype in Curtis Campbell, got on the microphone and said he's broke and can hardly afford fight camps.
You are a prospect and you are a finisher, second round stoppage. When do you want to get back in here?
Whenever, Dana, I'm broke right now. I just need some money to maintain some camps. It'll be nice if I could get a performance bonus. I could be here in July, I'm ready.
Somehow, things actually got worse after the event too. Video came out of Nathaniel Wood taking public transport back to his home on the other side of London while still wearing his fight gear. And whether it was the reason behind it or not, it led to a lot of people pointing out that the UFC only covers expenses for one cornerman now, not an entire team. So perhaps it was just a cheaper option for him. And then, a few days after the event, the main eventer, Lerone Murphy, announced he was selling his fight shorts on eBay. He just helped sell out the iconic O2 Arena, yet is selling his memorabilia for some extra cash. Everything combined, it's not a good look for the UFC. The huge superstars of the past aren't happy, the current big names are frustrated, and the lower tier fighters are saying they can't afford to continue in the sport. And with this Netflix card featuring Francis Ngannou, Ronda, and Nate Diaz, it really feels like a bizarre time for the sport and fighter pay. There's some positives with increased bonuses, another potential company getting involved in MMA with Netflix. But then there's a ton of controversies and negatives. It's impossible to predict what will happen, but with all the noise, it feels like something has to give soon. And as always, we just hope the fighters get paid more in line with other sports. Thanks for watching. We recently did a deep dive into Justin Gaethje, the most self-destructive fighting style in combat sports history. If you enjoyed this video, you will definitely enjoy that. You can check it out here.